In February 1945, Soviet leader Stalin invited US President Roosevelt and British Prime Minister Churchill to the city of Yalta for the most important and final conference before the end of the war. The aim was to agree on the division of Europe, as Germany had essentially lost World War II with most of its army destroyed. The conference ignited Stalin's anger when he learned that America and Britain would temporarily halt their advance towards Germany due to the winter season, which made troop movements difficult and was intended to reduce soldier casualties. Stalin suspected that America and Britain were trying to lure the Soviet army into a trap in Germany to weaken it post-war. However, Stalin was determined to end the war quickly and eventually agreed to continue the attack from the eastern side, albeit with several conditions for the Allies. One condition was that Eastern Europe should come entirely under Soviet influence. Additionally, Germany had to be divided into 4 sections: the eastern section for the Soviet Union, and the western sections divided among the USA, France, and Britain. The Allies stipulated that Berlin, located in the Soviet section, should also be divided. The crucial question was how Stalin would succeed in controlling Berlin, especially since Hitler had ordered its defense to the last bullet. What secret lay in Berlin that drove Stalin to reach it before American forces? Welcome to a new episode about World War II. Today, we will talk about the fall of Berlin. Immediately after the end of the Yalta Conference, Stalin summoned General Zhukov, who was known for his ruthlessness and strict adherence to orders. Zhukov was tasked with developing a plan for the invasion of Berlin. Realizing the difficulty of the task, Zhukov understood it would require the full might of the Red Army. Stalin set a deadline for the attack on Berlin, no later than mid-April, giving Zhukov only a few weeks to prepare. The Soviet army began mobilizing an enormous force: 2.5 million soldiers, 7,000 aircraft, 4,000 artillery pieces, and 7,000 tanks. However, the challenge was the need for sufficient military supplies, forcing Zhukov to wait for these to arrive. During this time, Stalin received troubling news that his Western allies had resumed their advance. Churchill understood the strategic importance of reaching Berlin before the Russians, as it would grant significant historical and strategic advantages. However, the American and British forces faced the formidable challenge of crossing the Rhine River, with the Germans having destroyed most bridges. Fortunately, the Americans found an intact bridge, which they immediately used to cross the river and establish defenses on the other side. Upon learning of this, Hitler ordered the execution of the engineers responsible for the bridge's destruction and sent troops to try to demolish it. Nonetheless, the American forces had already crossed and fortified their position. There were 2 opinions on the failure to destroy the bridge. Some viewed it as negligence, while others believed it was deliberate, with some in the German army preferring the Americans to reach Berlin before the Soviets. The American forces then pushed towards Berlin with urgency. In response, Stalin called General Zhukov to his office, where he found his rival, General Konev, present. Stalin cleverly exploited the rivalry between the 2 generals. He placed a map before them, drawing 2 lines to Berlin, and announced that whoever reached Berlin first would receive a great reward. Immediately, Stalin ordered Zhukov Konev to lead the Russian forces and execute a secret plan. Stalin's goal was to accelerate the Soviet arrival in Berlin ahead of Britain and America. In Berlin, there was a significant concern: Hitler's nuclear laboratory. Soviet intelligence indicated that the Germans were close to developing a nuclear bomb. However, this laboratory was situated in the American-controlled section of Berlin. Stalin needed to gain control of Berlin before the arrival of the Allied forces. The question arises, where was the German army that was supposed to defend Germany and prevent the Allied advance? People of all ages took up arms, whether they were old men or children. On April 12, 1945, U.S. President Roosevelt passed away, leading to a pause in the Allied forces' westward attack. Churchill attempted to convince the American forces to continue advancing toward Berlin, but General Eisenhower saw no issue with Stalin's control of the city. Stalin also aimed to preserve American forces for the upcoming invasion of Japan. When Churchill's persuasion efforts reached Stalin, he promptly sent a brief message to the Soviet leaders, informing them that they only had 2 weeks to reach the German Chancellery building in the city center. Immediately, Shakov advanced from the eastern side, while Konev approached from the southern side. Berlin found itself besieged by 2.5 million soldiers. As news reached the residents of Berlin, they hastily constructed defenses to confront the impending Russian attack, digging trenches on the city's outskirts. When General Zhukov's forces arrived at the outskirts of Berlin, they unleashed the largest artillery barrage in history. Eyewitnesses confirmed that the ground trembled incessantly. However, Zhukov made a critical error. The intense bombardment left the terrain pockmarked with massive holes, causing Russian vehicles to sink during their advance and disrupting the attack plan. Meanwhile, General Konev continued his relentless push toward Berlin through the forested areas. Zhukov, undeterred, pressed forward, breaching the fortified German defenses, even if they were weak. As Zhukov's forces approached the city center, Hitler chose to end his life in an underground bunker. To prevent desecration, he ordered his body to be burned after death, ensuring the Russians would not mutilate it. Despite violent resistance from the remaining German forces, Zhukov methodically cleared one street after another, inching closer to the heart of Berlin, the German Chancellery. When news of Hitler's death reached the Germans via radio, the last defenders received their weapons. Zhukov arrived at the German Chancellery building before Konev and Bell, capturing memorial photos and issuing orders to remove the Soviet flag from its perch above the Chancellery, as Stalin had instructed. And thus, we reach the conclusion of this momentous story. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, subscribe to the channel, and activate the notification bell.